Sorry about that. Hello. So I'm here to talk about the language server protocol. Does anyone actually know what it is? Did you come into this with any idea? One hand. Cool. Sorry? Some kind of interpreter. Yeah, that's pretty close. So I'm a team lead on the OmniSharp project. Does anyone here use VSCode? How about VSCode for C#? No? Nobody? Oh, no hands. Anyway, the OmniSharp is what powers the IntelliSense for VSCode. And the language server protocol is what spawned from Visual Studio Code. And that its whole goal is to give a protocol that you can implement so that any editor can support a language server. So what kind of things would you think would a language server be good for? I mean, Java, C# would be the big ones. But then there's also like the Roslyn compiler, getting those interfaces out, exposing that. Who here does Java development? Nobody? C#.net? Few hands? What about JavaScript, TypeScript? Cool. Do you use VS Code for TypeScript? No? A couple hands. But first, we need to really talk about the compiler, really understand what the language server protocol is useful for. At a high level, what does a compiler do? Can anyone tell me? It takes some source code and produces some sort of machine code, either .NET DLL or an executable or whatever. But as far as we're concerned, generally it's a black box, right? I write code, it either tells me I'm wrong or it tells me I'm right and gives me something to run. For the rest of the day, for every developer, it's really just like this. It's just magic, right? We don't know what's going on. And the language server protocol is to help you with that. Because every once in a while, it feels like this. And you're just like, why? What did I miss? Did I miss a semicolon? Did I miss a bracket? Where is it? Why is it telling me it's on line 1000 when I found the error on line 99? Once in a while, the compiler gets it wrong. Having an error in your editor, be it VS Code, Eclipse, Visual Studio, gives you a better experience and allows you to be a better developer. So what the protocol is, it's specification. It's an API. So it allows any number of editors to interface with any number of languages. And obviously, this list is a lot larger than that. But you can take Visual Studio, Eclipse, Atom, VS Code, whatever. As long as you can implement the language server protocol on there, you can then interface with one of these other technologies. And this is stolen from the Microsoft documentation, but I mean, the goal is any developer, any language, any tool, you do whatever you want, where you want it. So, I mean, why is it useful? If I write Java, I'm just going to use Eclipse, right? So that's what you do. I mean, I guess there's NetBeans and IntelliJ too, but you know, you pick the thing that's synonymous to that tool. If I want to do .NET, it's Visual Studio. That's just how it works. But what if you're crazy and you want to use Eclipse to write .NET? Or you want to use Visual Studio to write Java? Right? These are things that are possible with the protocol a lot easier than they are. Are there any Emacs or Vim users? I've got hands. I love you guys. I can't do what you do, but I love you guys. Well, what do you do, right? Like, Eclipse isn't synonymous with any sort of strongly typed language. And using Notepad, that's no better. So what we got is an example here. That's using OmniSharp. I'll find my mouse. And this is doing live IntelliSense. So we can go console, write line, if I could type. And then we can see that it takes in strings. And I'm not doing any magic here. This is the Monaco text editor talking to an OmniSharp instance on my machine using the language server protocol. And the same thing goes with TypeScript. And I don't know what happened to this code at some point, but it got mangled. I don't know why there's a semicolon there. But, I mean, it's telling us here that there's errors, right? Diagnostics, warnings, those kind of things that you see from Visual Studio, Eclipse, VS Code, whatever it is. And that text is really small. A lot smaller than I thought it was going to be. And I wrote in the wrong text editor. That's great. Anyway, let's go over there. I was on the wrong screen. Sorry about that. All right. So it gives you that kind of idea. So then, what editors can you use? I mean, I've talked about a couple of them, but there's, VS Code, which spearheaded the idea of what the protocol should be as others jumped on board. Has anyone heard of Eclipse Shea, the Code Envy guys? They're doing some really kind of cool stuff. They're using containers as a workspace. And so you can have multiple developers work on an environment. So, we helped get OmniSharp running with the language server protocol for them. But then Eclipse, Vim, Emacs. Anyone use GitHub's Atom? Still fairly popular. And then Visual Studio, and what other editors am I not naming? I think someone give me one. Which? JetBrains? Yeah, okay, I didn't put that on there. I actually don't know what they're doing with language server protocol today. I should look into that. And then what kind of languages support the language server protocol? Right? There's servers now for C#, C++, HTML, all the CSSs, JSON, PHP, every language you could think of has some sort of integration with these tools, just to make it so it's easier for your inner loop for figuring out what are these technologies. And this isn't even scratching on the surface. So writing a language server is a specification. It was originally spearheaded by Microsoft, but it's now adopted by a bunch of companies to be able to define what it is. It defines your operations, so your commands. And the server and the client can negotiate capabilities. So what that means is if I have a language that supports hover over or diagnostics, but it doesn't support, say, completions, because it doesn't make sense in that context, that the client won't even try to call completions because the server says, I can't do it. And that's okay. Your server doesn't have to support everything that you want. Under the covers, for technical details, it uses JSON RPC, because JSON is the new angle brackets, right? We don't do XML, we do JSON. And another important fact is bidirectional communication. I mean, a lot of us do web developers by day, I would assume, or at least web in somewhere. And unless you're using WebSockets, you're really only going one direction, right? To the client, or they're sending something to you and you're replying. There's no way for you to say, hey, here's some more information for you. This does define a way to have that backwards and forwards communication. And then there's various transports. So in the example I had running, it was using WebSockets, but you can also use standard sockets, or what I like to call the poor man's socket, standard input-output. Every command line has it, and you always have it everywhere you need to use it. And then there are numerous SDKs. Microsoft has one for Node with TypeScript or JavaScript. There is a Java one that I believe is Red Hat. Those are the ones that develop it. And then C# is one that I work on. There's a couple others out there as well. And I mean, I'm sure in whatever language you want to write in, you probably figure it out. Or there may already be one like that. What are the kind of things that the language server actually supports? Go-to definition. I hit F12 or whatever your key binding might be for that. It takes me where my code is. I can figure out what's going on. Rename. So renaming an item instead of doing like find and replace in the file like you did in JavaScript, and realize, oh, I just broke the world because I changed the wrong function. Workspace symbols, kind of a little weird in that case, but it's all of the different important things, classes, variables within a workspace. Just search across that and expose that to the editor so it has nice completion. Under the covers, there's logging. So you can see what errors are going on, at least if you're developing one. And then diagnostics, errors, warnings, all those kind of things that tell us, hey, your code's broken, or hey, you might want to actually look in this, it's a potential problem. And then everyone's favorite feature that Visual Studio gives you, IntelliSense. Right? I hit dot, and it tells me what methods are there. I don't have to think about it. Visual Studio tells me. And then signature help, hover, document symbols, or what are the symbols in the current document? Formatting, even code lens. So what are the number of references this particular method's used by, and clicking on that and going to definition on those. And code actions for diagnostics, WASM analyzer fixes, arbitrary things that you need to do against a specific area of your code. So why would you create a language server? I mean, there's many possible reasons. What if you have an architect who really likes his custom templating languages and says, you have to write this, but doesn't give you any tools for it? Instead of picking something that's out there, maybe write one to help you write them properly. Or maybe have him write one so that everyone knows what's going on. What if you have some arbitrary configuration, right? These values are important. Having the wrong value doesn't break the system. However, having the wrong value makes the system not work the way you'd intended. And being able to identify those. What if you're doing a custom scripting language? Game engine, for example. I have custom UI elements, defining that interface and giving those methods to users that are consuming it and giving them a nice experience within your engine, within your whatever tool it may be. Maybe it's a scripting engine as part of your website. I mean, thinking like Auth0's, what do they call it? The web functions, right? Everything's Lambda, all that kind of stuff. Being able to give an experience if you have some sort of, you can write your own code here in my method. And then even things like as simple as translation, right? So I'm obviously not a native Russian speaker, but being able to translate my comments or your comments and vice versa from Russian to English or English to Russian. So we're going to try and cover a couple of those here in just a moment in a couple of demos I've got set up. Are there any questions while I get switched over to that? All right. So we'll get this set up. Can everyone see that text okay? Great. So what I've got here is I've got a simple language server that is using the SDK that I've written. It needs some documentation, a few other things, but it is functional and gets us to our goal of showing you what a language server is. So I'm going to create a language server, and so this is going to be a server for this crazy configuration file that someone in my company has decided this is the way it has to be. And they're using ini files, ini files, because why not? I'm going to be able to support text documents on them, so like when someone opens a text document, the editor's going to tell me, hey, I've opened this document, here's the text. Here, I've closed the document. Do whatever work you want to do to unload that from memory, for example, if you're writing a large system, as well as when a document changes, what are the content of those, what is the content of that file that has shifted, and then completion. So I'm going to give some completion is the IntelliSense provider. The completion word comes from the handler that's provided for the language server protocol. So behind the scenes, we have this nice set of data, and this is just a tuple in C# that says here's the section name in your ini file, and here's a valid value for it, a valid name. If you're not familiar with ini files, I'll show that here in a second, explain what they are. But so these are the valid things that you can set something to. So I just generated a bunch of random data for demonstration purposes. So I'm going to go over that real quick. There we go. So now this is running Visual Studio Code, and it's opening up our test ini file. So these sections up here are our sections. So the inside the square brackets is a section name. This is a name under that section, and then here's the value. So now our language server protocol, or language server, I should say, has loaded. And it's saying, well, that's kind of odd. What's that? So unknown name, brand analyst 1. It's telling me that it doesn't know what you're trying to provide me. Maybe you meant brand analyst, like I have down there. That's a duplicate value. This server, we're not yet checking that you've defined that twice and that it's not going to be used. That could be something like, when Visual Studio says, hey, this code is never going to be hit because you returned up here. That kind of scenario. And then it's also got the same thing here for this other section, saying unknown section. I don't know what the heck you're trying to talk to me about. That came off the wrong place. Can everyone see the text okay, or do I need to make it a little bigger? It's okay? I'm seeing nods at the back, so great. So these are the possible sections. So chief, I don't know, brand designer. There's a library out there called, can't remember what the name was right now, but I just use that to generate all my data. So, I could say John, and then technician. I don't know. Group planner. But now when I go here for a section, the chief part isn't there anymore because the server is intelligent to know that, hey, you already defined that. There's no point to redefine it. Move up there and move up top. So I'm just going to go over some of the code just to try and show you what we're doing. We're not doing anything really too complicated. From my perspective, I didn't start this to be like, I want to be a text editor developer. I got sucked in because I was enthusiastic and felt like it, and it turned out that it's not that much different than business programming. You just have to think slightly different in some cases. So I have my simple parser, which we have a simple item and a range, right? So what is the range being the start and the stop point in your text file for that given item? What is its value, so the string value within that area? And type, which could have just as easily been an enum, but I was trying to be simple. And then for, reason that as a hierarchy. Parent was probably a better word, but didn't make it in. And so whenever we get an update, so someone's called our little service with an update, we're just going to parse. And this is the simplest, dirtiest parser you're probably going to see. Not saying it's good code, but it's functional and does exactly what we're looking for. So we look for important characters. Open bracket, then we start a new item that we're scanning for. Obviously, if you're a computer science person, you're probably frowning at me, and that's okay. So we get our special cases. Every section or whatever you're looking at ends when you hit a new line, a few other things like that. And then once we've updated our items, this way we can produce the diagnostics. So we can go through and just diff those. So I'm just using a little bit of link magic to say, here, give me all the sections that I know about. Give me the current sections, and let's find out which ones we have, which ones we don't. And if we have any extra ones, let's add some diagnostics for those. And a diagnostic is nothing crazy. You can give it a range, so that's where it's located within the file. It has to have a start and an end point, or else the editor can't show you where. It doesn't know where to draw the squiggles. The severity, is it an error? Is it warning? Should it be hidden? Maybe it's used for some other tool coming along for like code actions. So Visual Studio does some of its stuff. Code is just a possibly string or possibly a number value. I really wish I knew F# or did more F#. That would make more sense, but then no one would know what it's doing. And I went the wrong direction. There we go. And then same thing for sections. So within each section that we have, we're going to find any of the extra names that we don't know about. And this is where that bidirectional communication comes into play. So there's a place where it says, on the server, you can send a message. In this case, we're saying, here's the diagnostics. For this particular file, here's the collection of diagnostics. And the editor is going to go, okay, I got a new set of diagnostics. I'm going to forget about any other ones you've given me. Here's the new set. And then this is just a helper interface that implements a few handlers. But basically it implements change, open, closed, and some of the other plumbing for the negotiation that the language server protocol has you do. I'll go over that, the specification stuff, shortly, but it's just to help you with the, what can I do, what can't I do, kind of scenarios. But whenever you do a change event, we log a message, and we update the parsed text items. And then whenever we open a document, we do the same thing. Grab the new text, throw it in there, parse it. And completion is a little bit more nuanced. You have to give it a document selector. So with the language server protocol, you can potentially handle multiple documents, multiple document types, by either the pattern, if it's going to do it for me, the scheme, which is usually like the short name for a language. So C# is C, S-H-A-R-P, Java would just be Java, TypeScript is TypeScript. And then also the language, which they get kind of confused from time to time. Oh, sorry, no, I had that wrong. The scheme is the type, so scheme and URL, right? HTTP is the scheme. So there could be a place where you're actually getting these files, not from your file system, but from a remote endpoint, potentially. Then the language as well would be that special keyword. I apologize. So then we're just using some of our parser helpers. It gives us a method to get the item that's specifically at this place, the cursor that I'm looking at. So that'll be wherever your line is, your highlighted line is. And so if we're on a section, then you know what, we're going to give the completions for that section. And I don't know if I actually showed that, so I'll go show that. We create a completion item. You can give it any kind of kind you want. These are the kind of things you might be familiar with in your other programming languages. It's a class, it's a constant, enum, field, member, so that the editor can give you like nice little icons. And be like, so you can differentiate between the two different pieces. And then doing a little trick here for the insert text. So if you don't give me the angle brackets, I'll put them in for you so that the user doesn't have to think about it after the fact. So then if that fails, then we try to find the item that's closest to us. And that'll most likely tell us the section that we might be at, and other potential parts. And if that is null, then we just show the sections. So if we don't get an item, well, we don't know what we're doing. Here's a section. And then get the names. So, I guess I did actually do it. So yeah, you get where at this point in a file, it's found, okay, I know where that closest section is. That's my facilitator. If I'm nowhere near, then now we know that we're at this other top level. So now let's flip this around on its head. I'm going to flip to Visual Studio. And this is using the exact same server as soon as it loads. And so just a note for any Visual Studio users if you're looking to implement this, this stuff currently is in preview for language server support specifically. However, it relies currently on the new open folder feature of Visual Studio 2017. So how it interacts with, like, if I had a C# project open at the same time, not quite sure how that's going to end up at the end of the day. So it's going to hit my nice little breakpoint because I have all these things on my screen. And then now we get the exact same IntelliSense we had on the VSCode side before. With an error. Cool. It's always fun to get the exceptions while you're doing a demo. So you can do the same thing there, and just, if we put in the wrong values on that side, it tells us exact same warning. So I wrote that code once and implemented the client. It was done. So the next one, the title kind of gives it away, but that's okay. Uh-oh. Oh. Visual Studio is open. Visual Studio said, I can't do that today. I won't let you. So as soon as this opens up, this will be Java running in Visual Studio using the Java language server. Who ever thought you'd be able to do Java in VS? Anybody? One hand. Cool. All right, breakpoints galore. So now keep in mind, I didn't write this Java server at all. I stole the one that is used for Eclipse or whatever the tool is, whatever the VS Code plugin had. So I mean, it's telling me that do something is a void, or returns a void. Change that to wait. It's capital STRING in Java. So now it's telling me that's returning a string. Great. But do something's not really all that great a name, so maybe it should be, do something else. And the language server did it for me because it exposed an endpoint that knows how to rename something. And we still get things like system.out. I don't know what half of these things do because I don't write Java, but I know they exist. So you want to sprintf. And it tells you what are the arguments, everything that goes in there. Documentation, that's taking up a lot of space with the text size. And so I got one last demo real quick. Once I close this, and it's in VS Code. But I can't remember which one it was, so there we go. If anyone's wondering, that error is from a TypeScript error that's not really an error. I don't know why. So what this extension is doing is it's actually going to translate the comments for me. So if I'm not a native English speaker or I'm not a native Russian speaker, I can come in here and go over the comment, and it's going to do it using the Microsoft Cognitive Services or whatever tool gives me back the translated version. Whether or not that's right, I'm seeing laughing, so it could be right or wrong, I'm not really sure. But we can come in here and just have the exact same experience. So maybe it gives you an advantage that must have been funny. I have no idea. And it just gives you that experience of, that one worked? Okay, cool. I'll take 33%. That's totally better than 0. And I can try one more. Let's see how bad this one fails. So with that, I'm more or less out of demos. If there's any questions, let me know. I'm going to pop up this window real quick. All this code is on GitHub, so feel free to take a look at it, pick at it, figure anything else out that you want. The key that I'm using for cognitive services is not checked into GitHub, so you have to do that yourself. Sorry, you're not using my credits. But if there's any questions, I'm more than willing to answer.
Short question. Where is actually a parser lives in? For example, in this Java sample, did you need to implement Java parser too, or can I use some existing one?
So that's all built into the language server. So it'll be whatever language parser they've used to expose that functionality. So let's see. This is the one. Is this the Java one? Yeah. So the Eclipse project has a Java parser that exposes the language service. And so all I was doing with Visual Studio was consuming that. So as far as what it's parsing, what it's doing, I have no idea. And nor do I really care as an editor person that just wants to be able to do my code.
So it's pretty easy to implement a new language server for the language for which I have parser implemented.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have a fully featured parser that can tell you the metadata or the intrinsics about what's going on in your code, what are the completions at this cursor location, or what does the AST look like, what's a comment, what's not, then yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, woman. Thanks for the speech. And what about performance? If I run language server on remote host, I think it will be very slow.
So that's a good question, and it's something that I know some of the Microsoft teams have been battling. The team that does try.net is battling that scenario because the protocol is pretty chatty. If you're on a remote host, there is a company called SourceGraph. And they do remote stuff, so they're all about like code analytics and diagnostics with your code, kind of like SonarQube, but being able to like look at your code and the hover text while you're doing like a pull request. It's actually kind of interesting how they're doing it. So they've used it, and I haven't really seen too much problems. It comes down to how you're translating your files. So if you're sending the entire buffer every time you change something, that's going to be obviously expensive if you're editing a 1 meg file. Where if you're just transmitting the changes and say, well, I removed this range and I added this range, which is a couple bytes. But I haven't seen any like performance issues just because of the chattiness of the protocol itself.
And if I need to change some method name and its method use in many files, I need to send all files in my project, or how it works?
So the server has access to all of that information, so it has access to the whole project, not just what's open. So the file open and closed is more of like a editor optimization thing to say, hey, I opened this file. It's what's currently in context for the user. And so you might want to do more work in there, like the code lens items and stuff like that, that you may not compute all the time. As far as like making changes and doing a rename across files, that's all done with a workspace edit. So when when it does a rename, you return back a list of edits for each file, and then the areas of that file that have changed because of the rename, for example. So you don't have to worry about it as long as your server understands where all those pieces are. Does that make sense?